So, good morning. Identifying works has always been a big part of a music cataloger's work. Finding the fine line between grouping works in such a way that they are discoverable by our general users while still intellectually representing the work in catalog records has always been a complex and something with which we have never been particularly satisfied. Many of our frustrations have been exacerbated by our dependence on the MARC format, our primary method for communicating data. MARC was originally developed in 1968 for creating cards for library card catalogs. It has limited flexibility and does not represent our current library data models well. Our records, especially those for music recordings, contain a wealth of information about relationships between works, but is limited on a dependence on a human reading of the text of the record and putting things together, rather than providing a machine actionable set of links. There has been a growing interest in the library community to move beyond MARC to explore the possibilities of creating more flexible data models and that are compatible with and usable with the web of data. That is why many of us are exploring the possibilities of linked data in general, and in particular, in the US, we are looking at BIBFRAME, an ontology developed by the Library of Congress with the purpose of expressing bibliographic data as linked data. There's been a lot of hope that a more flexible ontology will eventually allow us to better express the relationships inherent in our data. So a very quick outline of what I'm speaking about. I'll give a little context to the work being presented here, being part of a larger grant series. Then I will move on to BIBFRAME and its extension for performed music. A short turn then to medium of performance will follow with an illustration of how these extensions might look like in a library catalog. So, over the past few years, Stanford University Libraries has been involved in 2 Mellon Foundation-funded projects to move toward moving cataloging workflows to a linked data environment. These are called linked data for production and then linked data for production 2, the pathway to implementation. While the primary focus of these projects has been on broader library workflows, we have also explored extending BIBFRAME to better represent data of various domains, including rare materials, cartographic materials, and music. So the primary goal of the music group, which included representatives of the Music Library Association, the Association for Recorded Sound Collections, the Program for Cooperative Cataloging, and the Library of Congress, as well as LD4P, was to develop a performed music extension to BIBFRAME, hereafter PMO, or the Performed Music Ontology, covering description of recorded sound from wire recordings to streamed audio to music video. So using BIBFRAME as a core ontology, we developed domain-specific vocabularies, enhancements, and extensions to BIBFRAME for use by the library community as the initial basis for a common linked data standard. While developed for performed music, that is, sound recordings, much of our ontology is also applicable to notated music, especially our work on modeling music medium, performance, and music work. And all I'm going to be talking about from here on was part of the outcomes of this group. So before I go on, though, now I admit I could go on about music works in BIBFRAME for quite a while. But since I do not have all day, I have my 10 minutes, I will focus here on one small aspect of the model, extending the BIBFRAME work itself. So for those of you not familiar with BIBFRAME, let's take a quick look at it. The Library of Congress initiated the development of BIBFRAME as a successor for the MARC format. BIBFRAME is designed to enable the discovery of bibliographic information on the web and in the broader networked world. It utilizes Resource Description Framework, RDF, a data model consisting of statements expressed in triples, as most of you know. In RDF, every entity ideally should have a corresponding unique identifier in the form of a URI. Thus, every entity and every relationship can be expressed as a URI, not a text string. The text string can change, but a link will always remain. So BIBFRAME is loosely based on Ferber and its updated version, IFLA LRM. It is centered on 3 primary entities that you can see there: works, instances, and items. Other entities are defined in relation to one of those 3 entities. On first glance, works are basically equivalent to the Ferber, seem to be equivalent to the Ferber expression, whilst instances are equivalent to the Ferber manifestation. There seems at first to be no equivalent to the LRM work in BIBFRAME conceptual model, something that rather concerned us. when we started. But while we tend to think of BIBFRAME model as a Ferber model with its head lopped off, the BIBFRAME work actually encompasses both the Ferber work and expression levels, so it is more appropriate to call it a truncated model. This is readily apparent when you look at the subclasses of BF work, which you see up there, which for music-related materials include BF audio for sound and BF notated music, as well as BF moving image. There are several others, of course. In terms of IFLA LRM, it could be looked on in some cases as also equivalent to the LRM representative expression, which also combines work and expression attributes. And I was going to just put up last night, if you thought the definition in Ferber for a work was very vague, take a look at the definition in BIBFRAME. It's a resource reflecting a conceptual essence of a cataloging resource, whatever an essence of a cataloging resource may be. Just as an interesting result of all this work as expression model is that for sound recordings, the performance aspect of the musical work increases in importance since a BF audio combines both a performance and a work, or in the case of something like an improvisation, may only be the entire content may actually just be a performance with no pre-existing work. But that, unfortunately, is for another talk. So how does this basic model of works in BIBFRAME work with music? So here we have 5 instances or manifestations of a single opera, Le Nozze di Figaro. The 2 on the left are full scores from different publications, but otherwise include exactly the same content, the entire record in full score. These 2 publications thus represent 2 instances of a single BF notated music work. Our next instance, the opera arranged for piano, represents different BF notated music work because it has been adapted. Finally, our 2 CDs, each containing a distinctive recording of the opera, represent 2 more works, though these, of course, are BF audio works as opposed to BF notated music. So from these 5 instances, we have 4 works. The piano arrangement can be further related to the original opera through a BF derivative of relationship with its inverse, but otherwise the works are not related at all, except perhaps by a very general property of BF related to. This was not quite what we were imagining in our move to linked data in increasing our expressiveness of relationships. While the need for a separation of work and expression levels can be a relief for some works, for works with multiple publications, arrangements, and recordings, the core BIBFRAME relationships are lacking. Because of this, the Perform Music Group of LD4P began to experiment with extending the work model. In studying this problem, we wanted to further relate our works in a manner that was similar to Ferber and LRM, and thus RDA, our current cataloging standard, but to keep it as looser and more flexible, compatible with standards, but not entirely dependent on their implementation. The definition of BF work and its subclasses are sufficiently vague to allow a lot of wiggle room here. And we took full advantage of this to use the generic BF work to bring together various expressions expressed as BIBFRAME, BF notated music, BF moved audio, and BF video, etc. So here we have three instances represented in RISM of a work named, unfortunately, La Villanella Rapita, 2 manuscripts, and a bilingual publication, plus a CD, which I had to make up since there's no recording of this. From their seemingly identical title pages, the 2 manuscripts seem to be identical copies and thus a single BF notated music. This may not be true, I couldn't quite tell. The CD is a recording of the opera with, it actually has insertions composed by Mozart, but as a BF audio, it is already a separate work from the BF notated music. If it were a score, it still would be because it has other content in it. However, we can extend the work hierarchy and state that both of these are expressions of the same BF work. So we are increasing our levels of hierarchy here and abstraction as we go. The same work, the opera by Francesco Bianchi. Our third instance actually turns out to be a completely different work with the same name, a pasticcio which contains a few numbers from Bianchi's opera and gets rather confused in both RISM and all library catalogs that I looked at. As a bilingual instance, it represents two separate works, the original work and its translation. These two may be thought of as expressions, if we're thinking of RDA, of the same generic work. This added layer is simplified in BIBFRAME by the inclusion of the property BF expression, which does relate two works to one another. Additionally, the French translation is related to the original by the property, whoops, I got a little ahead, BF translation of, and the generic work can also be related, the generic pasticcio work can also be related to Bianchi's opera recording because there is some shared material between the two operas, but I don't exactly know what it is. So that would be another very generic BF related to, but that's as far as I can go. So the joining of all these instances does bring all these together. It does not mean that I am stating that they are all identical in any way, only that they are somehow related to that greater abstract entity. Now more about that Mozart insertion there. The previous diagram, I went directly from the BF instance, including the insertions to the BF audio of the opera, highlighted in the circle here. But that may not actually be precise enough. That instance is really an instance of the opera using the Mozart insertion, itself a BF audio. And that BF audio is made up of two BF audio works, La Vianella Rapita de Opera and the vocal trio Mandina Amabile by Mozart. Since Mandina Amabile is also available as a separate manuscript, creating the existence of a BF notated music, we can then join the BF audio and the BF notated music with a generic BF work for Mandina Amabile. In this way, we can continuously build relationships amongst all these opera works. We can also add other levels to the pasticcio. The French translation may be available separately from the Italian in its own instance, though that would still be an instance of the same work. However, if a second translation were done for some reason, that translation would be another notated music work, and thus you might need a generic work that covers it all. While not really a necessity for this pasticcio, which was only translated once, the translation level of work might be greatly useful in library catalogs for collating translations, multiple translations by language. So from works, I would like to turn for a moment to medium of performance and its performed on music ontology enhancement. While we did much to enrich this area of BIBFRAME, I want to mention one specific enhancement which is closely related to our work discussion. With many exceptions, Western composers generally create works for a specific instrumentation, orchestra, bassoon, string quartet. Performers, however, often adapt or change the instrumentation in performance, whether out of necessity or simply for fun. This can cause confusion in defining works in a data model. Is it a whole new work because of a different instrumentation, even if it's not a formal arrangement? It is also a problem for music catalogers who are really not able to define whether it's intended instrumentation or the performed instrumentation that they are recording. The form music ontology resolved this issue by having two separate entities for medium of performance, PMO declared medium and PMO performed medium. A declared medium is that for which the work was intended, performed medium, the one used in performance, which may or may not be the same as the declared medium. So when we combine it with our work hierarchy, we still have an overall generic hymn. So here we have an instance with a BF audio with a performed medium of string orchestra for a work which has a declared medium of string orchestra. That's all very simple, but here we actually have an instance that goes to a work where the performed medium is actually a string quartet. It's fairly often that string orchestra works get played by string quartets. And also we have the same thing for an orchestra. So here we actually have three different audio works, but they are all joined together by a generic BF work. So how can libraries make use of this clustering of works in medium? Here is a possibility, an example of a user view for the opera Nozze di Figaro, expressed in BIBFRAME with added work extensions similar to those of the performed music ontology, as developed by Casalini Libri in Florence in their Share Virtual Discovery environment, a test union catalog using linked data. So on the left, you can see the various clusters, not very well perhaps, but so we have a notated music example, performed music example, a vocal score in English and Italian, and a vocal score just in French. And this is done using linked data. On the left, as I said, you could see the various clusters. Casalini derived these clusters from library data through machine algorithms, though it still requires a fair amount of manual cleanup, and they're still working on how to do music better. So it seems there is a good deal of potential in extending work models in BIBFRAME for use in library catalogs. So with that, my 10 minutes are well over, I know, and I look forward to any comments or questions you may have about works and medium of performance in BIBFRAME and its extension. Thank you.